Hey guys, welcome back. We're here to talk about all the things, not all the things, but some of the things. I feel like there's going to be more things that come up. Some things that I wish I knew before starting my book collection. Before we moved to Florida, I was starting to collect a lot of books and I started going book shopping a lot more. But then we moved, and so I did get rid of quite a few. But then when we moved to Florida, we finally had the space to have a library. I got the Billy bookcases from IKEA. These ones where I'm pointing right behind me, there is one, two, three. So I got three of these tall bookcases with the extensions because we had very high ceilings in that home. The living room where I had my library there, it was like full, like a two-story style ceilings. It was an open floor plan, so we went with very tall ones. And then in this house too, we also have taller ceilings. When I moved my shelves into this space, yeah, the spacing was just a little bit awkward, so we ended up with those smaller ones, and there was no IKEA around. We were gonna actually go get another bookcase from IKEA to match, but there is no IKEA here. We'd have to drive like 3 hours to go to an IKEA. So we got those ones, but I really like how it ended up. It adds a lot of different layers and dimensions. So I'm pleased with how it all came out. And when I finally was able to get the bookcases, it didn't take me long to fill them up. And I somehow gravitated and found all the different places that you can find incredibly cheap, thrifted, and even free books. I kind of went a little bit nuts and I picked up everything I saw that seemed mildly interesting. Now, I'm not saying that everyone needs to have a personal library. I think that my husband and I, we've been talking about when our kids grow up and we no longer need the size of home because it's a lot of work to have a large home. It's a lot of extra money to own a larger home, especially in the neighborhood that we live in. So we're thinking probably the next 5 years or so that when our kids graduate high school, they're on their own, that we are definitely going to be selling and downsizing. But until then, I love having a physical library. I love when I walk by and I see it. In my mom's home, she had a large library. We always had a library. In my grandmother's home, she had a whole room that was a library. And those spaces always seemed just monumental, and I just always knew that at some point I wanted to have my own personal library. And so I'm very pleased that I have arrived at that period of my life. I love owning my books because I consider myself to be a fairly slow reader, despite how many books that I've managed to get through. I mean, I can obviously prioritize a book, but I love the option to be able to not rush through it in 2 weeks before I have to go return it. That constraint on my mind somehow inhibits my reading process because like I said, I even though I go through a lot of books, I don't necessarily read fast. It's just that I read a lot of different things, and so I end up finishing a lot of different things. Plus I read a lot of audiobooks. Because of the fact that I thrift and find a lot of my books used, I'm less critical on the edition and the format that I get it in. Also realizing that sometimes when you find an unbeatable price, you're not always going to get the exact edition that you want. Paperback versus hardback, or matching to the rest of the books like in a series. But sacrifices have to be made for the right price. And I do feel like some mistakes were made. I do retrospectively think that in certain circumstances, even though the book was cheap, that maybe I should have waited and still been more critical. So here are some things that I have learned, some takeaways, and some things that I wish I had known before collecting all the books that I have. I feel like I've organized it in a certain way, but sometimes I feel like I'm jumping around a little bit, so I'm sorry. I really wanted to do this video though. It's been on my mind for a really long time. As I said earlier, I would find an unbeatable price, or I would find a book that was free and maybe I'd heard the author, or I think in a lot of instances I maybe had seen people talk about a book and I was thinking at the time, oh, that sounds good. And so then if I see the book, I will just add it to my collection and bring it home. And I don't even look twice sometimes at what the book is even about. I'm definitely guilty of that. And because I do read pretty diversely, like I will read anything basically. There was definitely a huge period of time where I'm always, and I always still am, experimenting and trying things that aren't necessarily my comfort zone because it might be the book that changes that for me. That's happened to me time and time again. It just happens to be the right book at the right time. So, I will always stay open to reading things that aren't necessarily things I think that I would like, but I just want to give it a try. But when I start to get so many books that I don't even know what to do with them, or they're not fitting on my shelves and they start piling up in corners or double stacking on my shelves, there was a point where I was like, there is just too much going on here. This is just overwhelming at this point. There's a lot of books that I feel like I read them once and I would never read them again, or I want to get rid of them, and reserving places on my shelves for books that I feel I would want to own forever. Now, you don't always know that going in, but I do have very specific genres that are only one-time reads. Fantasy, if I love it, I will generally always keep it. I feel that I would reread fantasy books that really spoke to me. I also like to annotate in them. In theory, now there are specific books that I definitely have given rereads to, and some that I want to, but I just never find the time to because there's always new stuff. Thrillers, mysteries, historical fictions, general fictions, romances. I feel most of the time that even if I really liked them, I really don't see a point in rereading them. There are, of course, some exceptions. In particular, mysteries and thrillers, I don't see the point in rereading them because you already know the plot twist. I mean, the whole premise of that genre is the whodunit. Again, there might be exceptions. I actually recently just hauled one of those exceptions, and that is Ruth Ware's Turn of the Key. I really, really liked this book, and it takes a lot to impress me when it comes to thrillers and mysteries because I've picked up so many. I was bored. I got bored, but this one I really liked. As a general rule, I could check it out from the library, and if I liked it that much, I could then acquire the book knowing I want to reread it again. Instead of acquiring the book, holding on to it for years, maybe reading it, maybe liking it, and then having to get rid of it. Some others of those fictional exceptions would be Dead Poets Society. I actually read this on ebook, and I decided that I really want a physical copy of that book. That's one of my favorite books of all time. And actually, I think the book is second to the movie. I think the movie actually came out first, but either way. In most cases, dark academia, I think, would be considered sometimes thriller, sometimes any number of those genres, but specifically the dark academia niche tend to be an exception to the rule. I tend to really like those. And a lot of times I feel like because they're more academically driven, they can be a lot more rereadable because of that type of content that they tend to have. And that is just me. That's not for everybody. All of these things are very personal to me. Classic books are books that I will keep forever if they're good, again. And this is, again, when it comes to classics, I did just kind of pick up everything. I've been running into a few classics that I'm like, I don't know that I should have added this book to my collection. Maybe I should have at least read the first 10 to 20% of it before deciding I needed to have a physical copy. And you could do that with classics very cheaply because most of them are going to be Creative Commons content. You can get them for free anywhere. One example of that are my Charles Dickens books. This collection is so hodgepodge for so many different reasons. We'll probably revisit this one over and over again, but I fell in love with Great Expectations. It wasn't actually my first Charles Dickens. It was the first Charles Dickens that I finished. I started with A Tale of Two Cities, to which I couldn't get into to save my life. But I did read Great Expectations, and I fell in love with it. And so I added almost all of his big books to my collection. One of those was David Copperfield. I got rid of David Copperfield. I have not read it. It was one of the worst books ever. I couldn't get into it. And I'm not even the first person to say that. So that's kind of one of those situations where I was like, I should not have put Charles Dickens himself on this like pedestal of like, I must read everything. So if I had to do it again, I think that when it comes to classic books, I will try to give them a try, like get like a free ebook or something or PDF book and read the first few chapters to get a vibe for it, to see if it's something that I really want to own, or I'll check them out from the library. The next point is formatting preferences. Hardback books are, of course, gorgeous. They're so pretty, but I'll be honest, they're not my favorite format. I find that they are rigid, they're clunky, they're heavy, they're large, and they're not always comfortable to hold, especially when you're talking about the really big tomes. When it comes to the smaller books, I'm fine with that. I really don't see a huge difference. Seeing them on the shelves looking all beautiful, like they do look really nice. They're not really difficult to hold, and they hold up in your bag when you toss them in your bag to go with you. Whereas like paperback books, they sometimes get bent corners and stuff like that. But now that I am more aware of my reading preferences, like I like to read in bed a lot. I like to sit on my couch and read, and I change positions a lot. I can't, like, sitting with a book in my lap and looking down at it is very uncomfortable for my neck. So I like to be able to hold my book up. And so when your book is incredibly large and heavy and bulky, it doesn't work. It doesn't logistically work. And I saw someone else talking about this, especially when it comes to some of the classics, like having these really big books that have been published in 2 editions, making each physical book a little bit smaller. Like that would be so ideal. And I think that if I had to do it again, even if I had to pay more for those editions, then I would probably do that. I've grown to prefer the trade paperback editions. I don't necessarily like the mass market paperback editions, although there are exceptions. When I read the book Dune, and even when it comes to paperbacks, trade paperbacks versus mass market paperbacks, I tend to prefer trade paperbacks because if you do find yourself wanting to annotate them, there's a lot more room to write in them and put your page flags and stuff. Mass market paperbacks, I feel like also have like different paper. Not always, but sometimes the paper is just different and it's harder to annotate. It's like cheaper or something, you know? So your page flags, like sometimes the page flags stick and pull up the paper more, and the paper yellows faster for some reason. Have you noticed that? Like I said, that might not be the case for every single mass market, but the ones that I have, I feel like that is the case. And let's be honest, mass market paperbacks are upwards of $11 now. That's so ridiculously expensive to me for mass market. And I just cannot bring myself to think that that's okay anymore. Like, they used to be like $5. Sure, $5, I could afford that. But like $12 for a mass market paperback? And I feel like when you read them, and you can keep your books looking nice, like with anyone, but I don't know. I don't like the way they look on my shelves at all either. Another downside to hardback books is the space that they take up on the shelf. They are just so much bigger. I have a couple instances of this actually where I've traded out a hardback book for a trade paperback, and I have so much more space on my shelf in those spaces. So for people who tend to collect a lot of books, space does become an issue, and I think I'd rather have the space. All right, the next thing is matching sets. As I was saying, so when you thrift your books, you can't always be very selective, you know, whether or not it's a hardback or a paperback or the movie cover edition or last year's, you know, updated cover design or whatever. And I find specifically that now I'm trying to be more aware of that, but then sometimes I'm like, this deal is just too good to pass up. So I'm just going to sacrifice the fact that they don't match the books I already have in the series. This especially is an issue when you are worried about missing out on a really good deal. Sometimes the deal is just seriously too good to pass up. And also, you know that there are some books that you rarely see at used bookstores or thrift stores, And you just feel like that opportunity to find that book thrifted isn't going to come along very often. So you go ahead and cash in on it. And I personally have gotten into this trap so many times, specifically looking at my Shadowhunters books. This is a perfect example of both kinds of mismatching, and I hate it. I have contemplated swapping out my hardbacks or looking for a specific edition, but I really also hate buying books twice. The whole point of thrifting them and finding them cheap was not so that I could go out and buy the book twice. That doesn't save me any money. And for what? Aesthetics? I have started to be a bit more picky if it is a series that I really care about. Or if I've already gotten a paperback or a hardback edition, I have gotten a lot better at just trying to hold out for the next book that's matching in some way or another. There are some instances that are no fault of anybody's except for the publishers, which I am very salty about. Specifically, we're going to talk about the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. I have all the first covers of this series, and then they come out with the fourth book, and they don't do a matching cover. No, they do this bright orange cover, and I hate it. And I have all the paperbacks, so I want to get the paperback. The hardback edition is this really pretty gray color, which I would be okay with, but I hate the orange, and I'm so frustrated. I don't want to replace my entire set. I've already annotated all of my original ones, and I'm saying this hoping that somebody out there who works in publishing will stop doing this to us, because it's just not fair. I'm so mad about it. Like, I want to rage quit, but I won't. But I also won't be buying the new set to mat, the new pretty matching set. Unfortunately, there's too many people who would do that, and so that's why they keep doing these things to us. If you cannot tell, I'm incredibly annoyed. The next thing I wish that I had known is regarding my classic book editions and preferred editions. And just like we see with all the modern books, it's like they're always coming out with new cover editions or special editions, or the classic books are even worse for all these different editions. I really don't know what it's called, but sometimes there will be like six classic books or whatever, that they do like a special release, and they do these new covers, and they do new font and paper and all this stuff, and they make them look just absolutely stunning, but then you can't get the matching set in your other favorite classics because they didn't make those. So I just feel like when it comes to classic books, you're always going to have a hodgepodge. There is no way around it. I feel like this section requires a lot of explanation and more show and tell. So I started my classics book collections with the Penguin Black editions, and I still really like those, and I still gravitate towards the Penguin Black editions. And I think it's a lot of it is because I already have so many, but they are a really good book. I like the way they feel. I like the way they look. They're really nice and floppy. But one thing I also didn't really consider a lot about is the text and the font inside on the pages. Another thing I didn't really think a lot about is the quality of paper. There have been a few books that I picked up where the text is so horrible, I dread to flip through the pages and look at them. A couple of these are actually my Oxford Classic editions, but there's something just so beautiful about the way the Oxford Classic editions look. There have definitely been a few books that I have picked up and I was just taken by the title of the book or whatever, and when I go to sit down to actually read it and flip through it, the paper is gross. The text is horrible to read from, and I dread to pick them up, and that is a problem. So the text and the paper really does matter, especially with my classics. I feel like I have a really big hodgepodge of different editions. Many I really don't care for a lot, and I don't feel like they're ones that I would hold on to. But the most preferred editions are my modern library books, my Oxford Classics, the Penguin Black editions. The Barnes & Noble Classics are actually really quite nice as well. For hardback editions, I really like the Everyman's Library editions. The paper and the text and the size of the books are just always just like so nice. They're perfect. And I love that they include like a ribbon bookmark. I'm absolutely in love with the Everyman's Library poetry collections. They're really pretty, they're great quality, and the way they organize their collections, I just really love how they do it. All right, here's a bit of show and tell. Okay, so Everyman Library poetry editions. So I have 4 in my collection. I have thrifted all of these. So these 2 are just one poet editions. Here's one of the collections that I was kind of referring to. Poems of the American South. The way they have these organized is they have Songs of Freedom, Lookouts, Tar Heel and Palmetto, Critters, Volunteers and Bluegrass, Wartime, Bayou and the Lone Star, A Cloud of Witnesses, Yellowhammer, Magnolia and the Natural State, Bows and Bells, Mountains and the Old Dominion, Sunshine and Peaches, Destinations and Tender Mercy. I guess that doesn't really explain what I was talking about more or less. Let's see. Here's the other one, Garden Poems. And the way that they have these sections is they have paradises, gardens of love, gardens of the mind, gardens of seasons, flowers, gardeners, the work of the garden, gardens of the wind, city gardens, public gardens, ruined gardens, and gardens of gardens, and a garden of gardens. So I love that you can kind of go through the index and see like what vibes you're looking for. All right, so as I was saying, there's certain like collections that they'll do where they just release a few of classics with special editions. This is like my Great Expectations edition, and this is from the Classic Lines. So these are Classic Lines editions, and it's like this beautiful watercolor cover. They have 6 total that they did with the Classic Lines. This is one of those kind of special editions. I think the bookstore I think it's Books A Million, has come out with all of these classic books in these editions. They all look very similar. If you got the matching set, like they all look good. And I actually have a short story collection of Chekhov in this style as well, and a Leo Tolstoy collection in this style as well. This is one of the ones I regret purchasing. It doesn't match any of the books on my shelves. It stands out like a sore thumb, and that is Charles Dickens' Bleak House. And I mean, it's flexible enough. It's already yellowing quite bad. There is absolutely no margin, and I can't say that I really like the quality of paper. It's not bad. It's just that like I know I could have, if I had held out, I could have gotten a better edition. And that's just one of those things I like kind of was impulsive when I found this and picked it up. Another collection I have about 6 of these books in these editions, and I have to say I'm not a big fan of these editions. They're kind of more like mass markets, but they look nice together when they're all together. And that is these Collins Classic editions. And they're squattier, they're shorter. So I think just like fitting them on my shelves is kind of annoying. They're also like, they're really stiff. I'm not excited about it. The text is really small, which it's not a huge problem, I guess. It's not that bad. I mean, there's nice spacing and stuff between them. There's margins. But I think as far as like having matching sets or something, I don't know. All right, here is a Barnes & Noble edition of Nicholas Nickleby. I have a few more of these as well, but I grabbed this one off my shelf for show and tell. And like, as I was saying, I actually really like these. Like, they're really floppy. The paper is the text is fine, the paper's all right. They like little mini bio in the front, introduction. And I think the colors of the spines and everything look really nice when you put them all on the shelf together. You know, they're pretty minimalistic. They look nice. The material they use for the spine, like even though it's a paperback, like I've bent this thing all the way and like it doesn't break the spine. So whatever they're doing here, because I know that's a huge issue with like books looking nice on your shelves for a long time with paperbacks, is like when you've read them a few times, like the spine gets damaged when they use that like cardboardy paper stuff. But whatever materials they're using for these covers, they hold up really nice. And like you can bend, like you can open the book all the way. You can open it all the way. Look at this. Bent it back. You saw that? I bent it all the way back and it's like fine. So if you're big on the quality of the spines and stuff like that, these are a really good option. All right, here I have a HarperCollins Legacy edition. They have 6 of these. The only other one I'd be interested in is Villette. They have Villette, Ben-Hur, those are all the editions that they have of this. But I saw this thrifted and they wanted $5 for this book thrifted. It has deckled edges. I know a lot of people don't like that, but I like the size of this book. It's also just really floppy. And I'm excited to dig into this book because I feel like I'm really going to enjoy just like reading from this book and annotating it. So I guess I could keep going on showing you all the different editions, but here's one of my favorites, the modern library classics editions. I love the gold bronze spines. I think they look so nice on my shelves. I love the covers. They are really soft. The text and the paper quality is nice, and I just really enjoy these. And I can't say that I have seen In Search of Lost Time in many other editions, and I never ever see them used, but I think that I would love to have the collection of In Search of Lost Time in these modern library editions because the covers are to die for. That is on my bucket list sometime. I do actually have this copy of Swan's Way, which is the first book in Search of Lost Time, and I'm really pleased with this, but I don't know if the translation is the same because this is there was a group of people who got together to do these translations, and they were going to pick one book of each book, I think, and do different translations or something like that. I forgot. I read the thing, but I don't know if that would be different from the modern library editions. Either way, I want to read this book first just to make sure I can make it all the way through. This is one of the most grueling reading experiences I have heard. I've heard it's very difficult to read Swan's Way, but if you can do it, it will be illuminating, and I want to do that eventually. I haven't upped it on my priority list or anything, but next year I do want to get to really slowing down on my reading some more classics. So maybe in the next couple of years, I will at least start the journey with this. I definitely think that when it comes to Swan's Way, though, I will be kind of doing like, if I can get through a chapter a week or something like that and just going like really slow, I don't know, like a few pages a day. And I'm usually really bad at pacing myself that way because I'm just not a very disciplined person when it comes to that, or I can set myself rules, but I never stick to my own rules. These are the Everyman's Library editions. This is No Dust Jacket. This is D.H. Lawrence's Women in Love. It has your little ribbon bookmark, but like, oh my god. It's paper. The canvas covers, they're really beautiful without the covers, but they are also just as beautiful with the covers. This is the Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens, and if I were to take off the dust jacket, it's this really gorgeous maroon canvas cover. But yeah, so I mean, the text, the margins, the paper. Anyways, that is everything. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this. Let me know your thoughts on this. So whatever takeaways you have, like, do you have specific editions that you like? Are you particular about hardbacks or paperbacks? Are you particular about specific editions? Are there special editions that you want to own? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.